What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the first movie of 2023 that I got to check out, and that is The Old Way. Directed by Brett Donowho and written by Carl W. Lucas, this film stars Nicolas Cage, Ryan Kiera Armstrong, Noah Gros, and many more, and tells the story of an old gunslinger whose past has come back to haunt him. Before we get too far into this, I want to take a quick moment and say a big thanks to those over at Saban Films for sending me over yet another screener to check out a little bit early, and this time around, a Nicolas Cage-led Western. When I saw the poster, I didn't need a trailer, I didn't need a synopsis. I went into this movie completely blind, because if Nicolas Cage is in a movie, I want to see it no matter what. Even if a movie sucks and his performance is terrible, I'm always just really interested to see what he does, because when it is something that's great or something that's a surprise, it's always just a really genuine surprise. So in the case of The Old Way, I went into this very open-minded, very curious to see what this was going to be all about, and I knew it was going to be my first film of the year and my first review here on the channel. And as I'm starting to catch up on some 2022 movies that I'm starting to catch up on here in the latter part of, or I was trying to catch up on in the latter part of this last year, and I'll be catching up on in the early part of this year, I was excited to know that my first review was going to be for a Nicolas Cage-led Western. So again, a big thanks to those over at Saban Films for sending me over an early screener, and let's get into this review. The Old Way centers on Nicolas Cage's character, Colton Briggs, whose name would strike fear into the hearts of man for years and years. However, one day he decided to just let it all go because he fell in love with a woman, and years later now has a child and is working at a store, except the movie opens and we see that he killed a man in cold blood right in front of his son. And we jump 20 years into the future, as he does have this wife and a daughter that he's not fully connected with, but unfortunately, his past has come back to haunt him, as that young boy who saw his father get murdered is now way older and is coming after Colton Briggs, and to do so, unfortunately, murders his wife and the mother of his young daughter, who he's not fully connected with. So now you have a double revenge tale as Nicolas Cage's Colton Briggs is coming back into the fold in search of the man who's murdered the mother of his child and his wife, the reason that he left that dark past behind. And on the other side, you have this young guy who just wants to kill the guy who killed his father. Going into this movie, I knew nothing about it, but that is the synopsis you can see, and the trailers do show that much. But yeah, I went into it thinking, hey, this is probably going to be a good time. I'm excited to see what Nicolas Cage brings to a Western film. And what I could say about this movie right out of the gate is, while I did enjoy the premise of the film, and I think that this movie had a lot of potential, unfortunately, I found the film to be pretty run-of-the-mill and a fairly generic movie. The overall story, the characters, and how things play out, it just feels wildly predictable. It feels like a movie you've seen dozens and dozens of times before, and not really something that really stood out to me, especially with somebody's filmography like Nicolas Cage, who has been in so many different kinds of movies, both great and not so great. And in the case of this movie, it's not a bad movie, but nor is it really all that great of a good movie. I just found it to be very middle of the road, very generic, saw where everything was going. There was no twists and turns and surprises in this movie. It is a movie that you've seen so many times before, and that's really the most I could say about this film when it comes to whether or not it's a good or a bad film. Just right down the middle. I can imagine that some may enjoy this film more than I did, and some might think it's way worse than I thought it was, but I don't think it was a bad film, but I really don't think it was all that good either. As I mentioned before, and as you've seen from the marketing stuff here on screen, it's a Western, and so going into it, I was definitely curious because I love Westerns. It's definitely a genre that can be done so well, and is something that we're disconnected from in modern society, so it's nice to be able to kind of jump into a period piece kind of film and see where it takes us and see what it does with that time. But unfortunately, outside of the costume design and the set design and the locations, which I thought was all great, this movie doesn't really have that Western grit that you come to look for in Western films. In a lot of ways, it felt like a bunch of actors playing dress up on a backlot stage of some studio. It's not really a movie that I felt really transported me to the time and really made me feel like I was in those Western days. This is a movie that feels, again, just run-of-the-mill in pretty much every department, even though I did enjoy the costume design and set design. But as far as the Western element overall, I just never really felt like I was fully in a Western film. There was something about it that felt way too clean and crisp and not as gritty as you hope to see from these kind of films. Andrew Morgan Smith gives us the musical score of the film, which I do think was definitely one of the highlights of the movie. I enjoyed the music throughout the course of the film. Now, to get a little bit back into the story, after the death of Colton Briggs' wife, him and his daughter, who he's not super connected with, who's played by Kiera Armstrong, who was in the remake of Firestarter last year, they end up going out and hunting down the man, James McAllister, who is responsible for the death of their wife and mother. And so this was an interesting dynamic. I enjoyed the father-daughter dynamic throughout the course of the film, but something that took me out of it from time to time is that both characters are meant to be fairly emotionless. You have Colton Briggs, who has this dark past. He's this gunslinger. When we see him at the beginning of the movie, he has this sweet stash, and it's definitely supposed to be your generic, just tough guy, gunslinger, don't mess with him, he'll take you down and take down the whole town kind of character. And his daughter is somebody who, when her mother dies, she doesn't even know how to feel and doesn't even cry. And so over the course of the film, she kind of has to learn what emotion is altogether. And since she has a disconnect from her dad, the two of them a lot of times are playing off of each other very emotionless. And that's kind of what they were going for, is these two characters that don't really have a whole lot of emotion, but find moments of emotion within each other and within family. And so when we do see these characters do get a little bit more emotional over the course of the film, it does work. But at times, even though I enjoyed the father-daughter dynamic, I found that a lot of the sequences just started to bore me because you have these two characters that are supposed to be kind of utterly bland for the most part. Noah Gros, who plays the villain here, James McAllister, whose father was murdered years earlier by Colton Briggs, is probably the best performance in the film, as I felt like he was the most committed actor when it came to really bringing charisma and some sort of conviction to his character. He's the one I felt like I believed in the most and what he wanted to achieve, which was killing Colton Briggs for killing his father all those years earlier. And while you do have a husband and a daughter trying to avenge their wife and mother's murder, it never really felt like they were as committed as this guy, James McAllister, the villain, was in terms of getting back at Colton Briggs for his father's death years prior. So Noah Gros definitely gave the best and most committed and charismatic performance here as a villain. However, I did find his character, for the most part, to be fairly one note. I want to kill Colton Briggs. That's pretty much it. So yeah, guys, that's gonna be my thoughts on The Old Way, a fairly generic, run-of-the-mill Western film with Nicolas Cage at the center. This is a far more subdued performance when it comes to Nicolas Cage. Don't go into this movie expecting something big or bombastic or big Nicolas Cage moments. He's definitely kind of bringing it in, reeling it in for this movie, as he's a far more composed and quiet character that doesn't really have a whole lot to say and isn't really having any moments of outbursts. While there are moments of good performance from Nicolas Cage over the course of the film, I do think that for the most part, this is a fairly generic Nicolas Cage performance. And I think, though, if you're a fan of Nicolas Cage and you just are a purist and want to see everything he's in, there's stuff to be enjoyed here. But I think most people are going to walk away from this one thinking it's not something I'm going to revisit. Whether they enjoyed it or didn't like it, I don't really see this being one that's going to be a consistent rewatch in the Nicolas Cage filmography for most people. Again, a big thanks to you guys for watching, and a big thanks to those over at Saban Films for sending me over an early screener for this one. Definitely want to hear what you guys have to say. So if you saw this movie and you liked it or you didn't like it, leave some comments down below. Hit that like button because it really helps the channel out. And hit that subscribe button if you guys are interested in more early movie reviews like this one. I'd definitely love to see you guys come back and check out more reviews here over the course of time and talk movies with you guys in the comment section. A big thanks to you guys for watching once again, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.